Level Uppers. It's Sharon here from Showcode, and we've got an incredible session about better education hosted by our lovely Alex, aka the Kid. So Alex, I don't think you need more of an intro than that. I'll turn it over to you to wow all of us with how awesome better education and gamification can be.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a bit weird with the role reversals of you introducing me rather than me doing the intros. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody, and welcome to Better Learning and Better Education, as Sharon said. Obviously, one of our categories going into the hack this weekend. So I've got a little slideshow that hopefully you'll be able to see on screen in a sec. And yeah, we'll just go through that, kind of mock up a few ideas. There are a few questions throughout, so use the chat feature, get involved, let us know. And yeah, we'll kind of chat through ideas. But yeah, let's go with better learning and see how we can go from this on the left-hand side to this using gamification. I think for those that have been to sessions already this week and for those that haven't, just kind of a brief intro, I guess, is what we'll be focusing on for this session specifically is kind of the fun aspect of gamification. And I think with learning and education especially, that's super important. You know, we've all kind of been in classes, I assume, we've been in lessons, you know, school, university, work, wherever it may be, where maybe there's a lack of motivation, maybe you just straight up don't like whatever you're doing. You know, it can be tough to learn and sometimes you need to, but yeah, I think this is a great opportunity to kind of look and see how we can go from boring to exciting using gamification. So just kind of a question to get the ball rolling. And this, as much as anything, is just to get you thinking about what gamification is, I think. So this doesn't specifically have to relate to learning. I think just kind of what apps do you use that employ gamification? Just have a think, like on a regular basis. Again, for those that were part of our panel yesterday, you'd have seen us talking about a few things, a lot of great suggestions in there. So just those kind of things. What do they do? So I'll go to the next slide, for example, and I promise this wasn't just a plug for us, but we've got our kind of leaderboards on Showcode if you're part of that. You know, Strava uses competition to go against each other. Monzo, Revolut came up a lot of times yesterday. So again, just whether you have a think in your head or kind of put it in the chat or whatever, let us know a few different things that you use that use gamification, because I think it's good to kind of get your head around the different types, and we'll go into it a bit more, but the different things. So whether it is a leaderboard, whether it's stuff like the competition on Strava, whether it's things like Duolingo, which we'll come on to a bit more, and they have a lot of progression-based things and streak-based things. Yeah, it's good to have a think about the different types of gamification. So let us know in the chat. We'll kind of go through anything that you do. It'd be interesting, I think, to see not only apps that use gamification that do it well, but if there's any that you think don't do it so well. Yeah, so open to those. We'll kind of go through them throughout, and at the end, if you have any suggestions. But we'll focus on learning now. Obviously, the point of this session is this is the final category of the hack, one that we're back in. So we've been through better retail, security, mental health, and finance. This is the last one, is learning, and we'll go through some kind of theoretical stuff to start with, and talk about why it works. So I think this is not just for education specifically, but, you know, this is for gamification as a whole and why it works as a wider thing. So you can apply all of this theory to finance, to education, whatever you kind of hack for later on. But I think specifically it works for education. It triggers real powerful human emotions such as happiness, intrigue, excitement, and accomplishment. All around the world, companies, institutions, and household brands are using gamification with marvelous results. So, and these will be good to remember for kind of later on, both later in this PowerPoint and when the hack begins, is it plays into basic needs. So I think when we're thinking about education, when we're thinking about learning, that kind of value, the autonomy, the competence of it, and the kind of validation levels when you're learning can be super important. So you may not want to do something, you may not be motivated to do it, but if you kind of get rewards, if you get achievements, if you can see the value back from that, it's an extra motivation to do something. I think that is one of the keys for better learning and better education is, well, how can we transform something that maybe you don't have the motivation to do? Maybe you can't really be bothered to do it. Maybe you don't like maths or don't like English or whatever, but you need it and you need to learn and you need to do it. So how are we going to create that process to become easier, to become more fun, to become more engaging, because, you know, they're kind of core skills. So games can be social as well. As we mentioned at the start, you've obviously got leaderboards where high scorers are placed, so players can feel validated, and players may be able to challenge their friends or invite others to play, which again is another really interesting thing with education. I think a lot of it, if we kind of look back on school, is very independent. You know, is there an opportunity there for it to be more social, for there to be more kind of one-on-one? Will that feed into what people want? I don't know, it'd be interesting to kind of explore. Games encourage ongoing engagement, so kind of similar to the social aspect of things, I guess, but also, you know, not everyone's going to be super competitive. For those that were in Rachel Clance up earlier this week, if you weren't, it's great to check out. It's on our YouTube, quick plug there. But she kind of talked about the different player types. So you had killers and achievers that, you know, they would fit into this leaderboard competitive actions, but that doesn't encapsulate any. So, you know, some people just want to be involved for the sake of being involved. They want the validation, they want the achievements. So stuff like gaining points and rewards, or simply discovering information, is equally as powerful, and make sure that you don't alienate those that don't necessarily want to be at the top of the leaderboard, that aren't necessarily those achievers and killers, as was mentioned earlier in the week. And then it gives players, and again, if we're talking in the sense of education, learners, control. So, you know, we've been sat in classes before, you know, not in control, get told what to do, X, Y, Z, this is how it goes step by step. With gamification, and as you know, I'll keep banging on about Duolingo, and we'll come on to it a bit later in a bit more detail, but, you know, it's that autonomy and that control of you're in charge of what you're doing. But not only are you in charge, because there's a balance, right? It's great to be in charge, but if it's something you're not motivated to do, you're not going to pick it up again. So you need to give people control, but you need to make them want to come back and do it as well. So I think, yeah, that's kind of a bit of theory around why it works. I think the next thing to consider, and again, this would be great to, there's a bit of a delay, so I won't pause now, but if you have any kind of thoughts and answers for this question, let us know in the chat. We'll come back to it at the end as well. So have a think throughout this presentation. But how and where do you think you could benefit from gamification in learning? So this can be now, it can be how do you think you would have benefited in the past? As I say, you know, school, university, business, wherever it may be. What is a subject matter? You know, what kind of wider things do you think in education, in learning, could have benefited from gamification, could still benefit from gamification for you specifically? I think that's going to be an interesting approach as we go into this hack, is focusing on your experiences and what you can relate to. So yeah, as I say, get your answers in the chat. We'll kind of explore those as we go. Have a think as we're going through the presentation a bit as well. And if you come up with any answers, just pop them in and we will discuss them a bit at the end. But we'll move on to the different types of gamification. We've already kind of touched on a few, but just to go into the specifics. So point scoring goes back to the importance of validation. Giving points for completing specific tasks and giving points for completing harder challenges is a staple when it comes to gamified learning. Again, I think, you know, if we kind of merge the first two, not everyone is going to want the competitive aspect. It's kind of a tough balancing act. Like, there's going to be 100, 200, however many people you've built in your community, that they are going to want to be top of the leaderboard. They are going to want to go head to head. You know, groups of friends are going to want to compete against each other, but there's also going to be a lot that you would alienate by just going for that competitive approach. So that element of like point scoring, no matter what, is important. So yeah, kind of touching on that, and competition. Obviously, using leaderboards is a great way to keep people engaged. Just be wary not to alienate people. The next one, progression, again, similar to point scoring. I think this is probably even more important, because you never want to, I keep using the word alienate, you never want to leave anyone out. So when you're thinking about your hack, you need to think about kind of the viability of it and who's going to use it and how they're going to use it. And as kind of a business or a product or an idea, you never want to leave people out, which unintentionally you may do when you just focus on progression, just focus on competition, just focus on point scoring. I think the more you can kind of incorporate into your examples, the better, because it fits everyone. Then there's no one size fits all with any of these examples. And then the last one, badges. I think we all love badges. It's a great kind of like tangible result of what you've achieved, and can hopefully motivate people to go to the next step. I think you apply that to learning especially, and whether it's, you know, as simple as to go on a CV, you know, to go on your online portfolio, whatever it may be. Badges are amazing, you know, kind of just a validation of, yeah, I competed in this hackathon, I came second, I came third, I came wherever. You know, I won the prize for better learning because some workshop I attended in the build up. So yeah, there's kind of loads of options when it comes to badges, and I think it definitely makes sense as something to utilize. As I mentioned, I've been kind of building it up. Duolingo, it's definitely been mentioned in other sessions. I think it's probably one of the best examples of gamification, and I think part of the reason for me is because it touched on a subject that, as I say, can be quite, for me personally, boring. So I think with better learning and better education as a whole, the key focus is going to be, can we turn something that isn't exciting, that isn't motivating, you know, you don't get up and want to do it, and turn it into something that, oh, okay, I've got to keep my streak going, or I'm only behind 3 lessons, and when I get 3 lessons, I get another power up, or, you know, my daily achievements, all I need to do is complete 2 more lessons, and away we go. And I think that's one of the things that Duolingo does amazingly is they give you, as we've mentioned, the autonomy. They put you in charge of your own learning, but they hook you back. They use gamification to make it that, oh, I want to go on today, I want to learn today. And, you know, you may not be feeling it. You may wake up and think, oh, do I really want to carry on with my Spanish today? Not really. But then you see a little 207-day streak pop up and you think, go on then, just 1 lesson. And I think that's a really powerful thing that Duolingo do. And then to touch on another thing is, as I mentioned in like a slide before, is they don't just bank on one thing. You know, it's not just about a competition. It's not just about progression. It's not just about a streak. They incorporate it all. So you may not be bothered about a streak. Some people are bothered about a streak. You may not be bothered about progression, but some people are. You may not be bothered about power-ups, but some people are. You may not be bothered about achievements, but some people are. And hopefully, if you're in one of those camps where you aren't bothered about one thing, you will be bothered about another. And I think it's an interesting thing to think about. And again, if we're still thinking about kind of apps that we use that use gamification, or that could help for education, I think it's an interesting one to think, well, what camp am I in? You know, I personally would love the competitive elements of things like this. You know, I love the leaderboards, I love going head to head, but I'm also wary that my flatmate, for example, and a couple of my colleagues, they wouldn't want that. So yeah, kind of put it into your shoes, make sure that you're covering as much as possible. And that's what Duolingo do really well, is they kind of deep dive into a few different aspects of gamification and make something that is potentially boring, sorry to anyone that loves learning languages, but I do not, and turns it into something kind of exciting and engaging. And just another thing to kind of relate it back to the hack later is, the success is important. So these are Duolingo's results, and this is, you know, some amazing stats from a business perspective. 300 million active users, 7 billion exercises completed per month, which is, yeah, you know, the mind-blowing GIF says it all. And 10 minutes per day per user on average is really good, and I think shows that they're not that bothered about you spending loads of time on there each day. They just want that repetitive use, that continual use. But the reason to put these results in is because you'll need to consider the impact and the success of your idea and your product and your business and kind of the market there is for it. And by gamifying it and, you know, adding these things in, Duolingo have turned something that is essentially just learning a language. Like, you know, it's online lessons. That's kind of all it is. But they've turned it into this massive kind of business with 300 million active users, which is amazing for them. So bear that in mind with your ideas. You know, it's one thing to have a great idea, but are people going to use it, and why are people going to use it? And I think the gamification aspect is really important to that, and make sure you get people coming back and coming back. So we'll go back round to this question then, and how and where do you think you could benefit from gamification in learning? I think it'd be great to have some comments. I realise that there's a slight delay between the stream and the presentation. So as you're kind of answering this and having to think about this and hopefully putting some things in the comments to think about, I'll just go over some final tips for better learning. So think big. I think this is for every category, especially, but better learning. I think there's real scope to kind of think really big with this. So, maybe you'll change something, the way things are taught in schools. Maybe you didn't like it. Maybe there's a certain subject at university that you think could be gamified. There's massive scope within education, and whether it be kind of like that educational system, whether it be something like Duolingo that turns like an entire study of languages into an app that's gamified. There's real opportunity to think big, and you've only got 48 hours, so we don't expect you to come up with a fully functioning Duolingo, but the idea counts. And if you kind of think big and then like design small and head towards your MVP, that will be big. And we'll kind of reward that in the judging that you'll see later. I think on a similar ilk, and again, this is one of our hackathon tips, I think earlier that we released, is to think outside the box. So we've obviously talked a lot about Duolingo-esque things, schools, universities, and I think that's all relevant and that's all great. And I think it'd be great to see kind of solutions based on that, and hopefully we've got some things coming through in the comments based on things that you can use to gamify learning and that you'd benefit from. But also it can be different, think differently, basically. So rather than schools and university in certain subjects, is learning actually about increasing awareness? So whether it's something like climate change, whether it's something about pollution, like, can that be the better learning? Can it be something that, it engages children to think about things toward the future? So, whether it's like finances, obviously that could kind of cover a couple of categories, but have a think. Maybe you'll use it to improve society, like across multiple areas. You don't just have to kind of define it to, oh, I'm going to make teaching maths easier. So I think those two are really important. I think big and think outside the box. And then something we've kind of touched on throughout, and I think we've touched on throughout all of our sessions and workshops, is to draw on personal experience. So whether it's something you find boring, something you're passionate about changing, or just something you've experienced that could be better, the best solutions come from those who draw on their own experiences. Because I think, to kind of go not too technical again, but there's not going to be time over the 48 hours to kind of go through user testing and that kind of thing. So rather than guess what people think, just use what you think and use what you've experienced. And this is why I kind of want to get you thinking about this. And think about where you can benefit from gamification in learning, or as I mentioned at the start, where you could have benefited from gamification in learning, because I think that's where the most powerful ideas will come from. So yeah, I don't know if any questions or any ideas or anything are streaming through, but I guess I can check the chat now. Hang on a second.
I'll jump on, Alex. They were, but it looks like for me it has crashed. So I might need to reload and come back in. But there were two things that did come up from the community that I think is worthwhile answering. The first was from Smarky, and it was around, a lot of people come into the mindset of a hackathon that you've come in, you've got to hack something, or take something that already exists and kind of engineer something new out of it. And I think that might just be a bit of a misnomer in the name hackathon. There's a lot of different words for this. Some call it tech sprint. The whole idea is to come up with an idea with your team, work on it together, start to bring it to life, and then kind of present on it. At our 6 p.m. later today, we'll go down in greater detail what the judging criteria looks like. We also had another question I think I can answer with this response. That is, a complete product is not required for submission. Prototypes, proof of concept are always acceptable. A part of the judging criteria is the technical aspect of what you've built. So, the more complete you have a product being, the better it is in terms of scoring for that particular criteria, but it's not the only criteria. So don't be dissuaded if you cannot get it up and running in time. A lot of it is, the viability of your idea, what aspects of gamification it's using, or you've thought through to have it used. and also how it helps benefit society. There's a lot of criteria that we look at in judging, and we'll share that and kind of how we score that in that next session. So I would say, if this is your first hackathon, if it is something where you might be unfamiliar, unsure, what you should get out of this: have fun, learn, meet new people. That's the goal. Build something awesome. I'm going to quickly jump out and jump back in so my chat comes back up. But I'll let Alex continue.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, and I think that's probably the big thing when we talk about thinking big, and when we talk about that kind of thing, it's not a case of think big and get it all done within 48 hours. It's spend time at the beginning nailing your idea, nailing your thought process, thinking, right, what am I going to do, whether it's in better learning, better finance, whatever category it's in, what am I going to do that's really going to help level up society, that's really going to use gamification to make this specific thing better. And as I say, that can be on a massive scale, it can be on a really niche scale, but just think about that and nail that idea, and then build from there, and build as much as you can, in the sense that it's 48 hours. You're not going to have a product finished. Like, no one ever does or ever will. Like, prototypes are fine. And Sharan said, we'll go through it in like more detail later on. But the kind of think big element of it is not necessarily think big in terms of what you have to get done over the weekend. It's more in terms of the idea and what impact that can have. I think that's what I'd say.
Definitely. I want to chime in, especially in the education part. I think what would be interesting is when you look at things like Duolingo and you look at things like Grasshopper, what they do well is they take very large and complex ideas, and they break them down into small addressable chunks that you learn piece by piece. So they take, it could be conjugation in a language or the way verbs are structured, and they break it down into small kind of bite-sized exercises that allows you to reinforce those skills. That's what you need to think about if education is a category you're going to go down the route of building your product around. Is look how they're utilizing that. Look how, through a series of maybe, 10 or 20 challenges, you actually learn, a tense in a certain language, or you learn the basics of how logic works and like if or else statements in coding. I think that's a really interesting and successful application of gamification in the education space. And then, Alex, I was going to say, you asked a series of questions. If we could just bring those 3-4 questions you've asked back to the limelight, what I'm going to do is just share the chat screen so the community can kind of chime in. So if we want to jump onto that first question you asked, and let's see what the community has to say.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'll just share my screen quickly. But first, just a quick one. I've seen a comment from Khalid in the chat, and I think it's a great question about defining better learning. I think it's an intentionally wide scope, so you don't have to think of something that covers a subject. It can be productivity. It can be, as I say, learning from like an awareness perspective and teaching people things. It certainly doesn't have to cover just kind of one topic. But yeah, I think if we go back to kind of the 2 questions around what apps you use that employ gamification and whether or not they do it well, and then how and where, and I think this is the one that's kind of going to be interesting from a better learning perspective and building towards the hack, is how and where do you think you could benefit from gamification in learning? And this can be now, kind of where you're at in your heads, in your careers, in your student life, or it could be something that in the past you think. So I think Duolingo is the perfect example for me, because I'd always wanted to be better at languages, I think, and I'd always wanted to learn a language, but school had never motivated me. So I think, Duolingo obviously exists, but it's the perfect blueprint for me of that's something that really would have helped me in school if we could have used kind of a gamified approach and something like that would have made me more engaged with the language, because I look back now and think that would have been amazing. So yeah, I think we've kind of opened the chat up. It'd be great to get anyone's thoughts around either of those questions. And yeah, fire away. Don't be shy. No wrong answers. So yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what you all think. As I say, there's a slight delay, so we can wait a while to see what people are saying.
But I was going to say a bit earlier on, there were 2 examples that were raised that about, when you mentioned these apps, somebody mentioned Forest, which we've talked about before. I think it's raised by the community in our panel session, and Forest is a pretty cool app. There was also Focus Plant, I think, if I've got that correct. And that was like a Pomodoro style timer that also helps grows trees. And I think there are two interesting examples that were raised by the community when you first asked that question.
Great, because yeah, forest came up earlier, and I think that's that's a good example of something super simple. It doesn't take gamification, it doesn't go leaderboards, doesn't go competition, it doesn't go progress, but it kind of keeps you off your phone and it does what it's supposed to do. So yeah, forest's a great example. So thank you for whoever brought that up. And Khalid, I'm glad to see that it answered your question as well. So thank you. But yeah, that's great. See if anyone has any more thoughts quickly on how and where you think. I don't know if it's getting so close to the hack that no one really wants to give away their ideas. They're thinking I'll save it. We're only 2.5 hours away if my terrible maths is correct. So they're a bit like, why would I share my idea now? But as I say, while we kind of wait for hopefully a couple more answers to that, just want to say a big thank you for everyone attending this week overall, and hopefully you found all of these sessions helpful as long as this. So a good question around how crucial is the gamification to the solution? Very would be my simple answer. It's going to be kind of a key part of the hack, and again, it'll be part of the judging criteria that we'll go through later. However, what I would kind of caveat that with is, and Forest is a very good example of, the gamification will be important in terms of making sure that it helps what you're trying to do. It doesn't have to be like a super complex use of gamification. You don't have to use millions of examples of gamification. It doesn't have to be kind of everywhere. So, Forest helps you grow a tree to focus, and it just makes sure you don't go on your phone. And that's a great example of something really simple that achieves what it needs to achieve through gamification. So I think it's very important to incorporate an aspect that helps you with your solution. So making sure whatever category you go with, the gamification that you incorporate helps your end goal. That's going to be important, but you don't have to go kind of super in depth with the gamification.
And we've got somebody in the chat, Shy Master. Coursera and Khan Academy utilize gamification to an extent. Yep, I think they definitely do. I've seen the way they progress, and you break down the big courses into small chunks. It's probably not their biggest strong suit, but there's definitely small aspects of gamification throughout both of those applications. So I think there's a lot of things to take on from in the learning category. I think one way to look at it is, you've got the whole self-learning route, so things like Duolingo, things like Coursera, and then another way to look at it is, education as a whole, like the formal education that university students or children may go through, or people who are looking to go through boot camps and reskill. There are probably ways to help gamify that as an industry as well. It's interesting because when I went to school, a lot of education was very analog. You've got regular textbooks, physical books, you're doing things with pen on paper, and the era we're in, right, that's all a bit outdated. It'd be interesting to see a progress bar as you go through your book, how much you have left. And if you go and you answer questions in your textbook and doing like assignments, it goes back and gives you kind of a scoreboard of concepts you understand and how strong and familiar you are. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of benefits from gamification in formal education that we could see. But I will say, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because you can also see how addictive digital behavior can be for the youth. And so, I guess there's a fine line to draw between creating a better way to learn versus just getting people hooked on getting a point or a star or a sticker.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting one as well, the kind of wider education piece, because essentially at its heart, it's not gamified, but it's based on grades and points and whatever. So it's already starting to incorporate those things, just not kind of as it perhaps should be. It's gamification. Good question around gamification being suitable for older people. Yeah, like I guess it's one of those things that it'd be interesting to research kind of the impacts, but without knowing off the top of my head and having done the research myself, I certainly wouldn't limit it to younger people. I think Duolingo is a great example that, and I'm sure we could probably find some stats around kind of the demographics and the breakdowns. But yeah, there's no reason that they couldn't get involved with that kind of thing as well. It's a good question.
And I would say, I can't really speak for older people, but there are a lot of apps that are used to kind of enhance your brain reflexes, your ability to do quick maths, your ability to solve logic puzzles, look for patterns. There are definitely stuff that helps in gamified ways for mental acuity. I've played around with them a bit myself. I'm not in that age bracket, but like I think a lot of that could be utilized for older people. But I would say Alex and I are not scientific experts on that, so don't take our word for it.
Yeah, I think that'd be the big takeaway that I'd say from that, is that it'd be really interesting to explore, and I would never say don't do it for kind of people 60 and 70 plus, because I would say it'd be interesting to see the demographic breakdown for something like a Duolingo, but it's not something we've necessarily researched.
You had a couple of other questions. You want to pull those ones up, Alex? Throughout the presentation.
Yeah. So just around, so obviously we had the how and where do you think you could benefit from gamification in learning? That was the only other one, really.
Cool. I mean, I'd love to hear from the community. Have you ever been, successfully benefited from gamification in learning? Any experiences, perhaps like Duolingo or Grasshopper or Coursera or things like that? Any personal examples from anyone? Maybe that 20-second timer while we wait.
Yeah, I was going to say the suspense is killing us. We'll see who rolls in with their answers first.
I'll chime in with me, and that is that I use Grasshopper to learn a bit more about the fundamentals of coding. I think it's pretty cool. It's very much Duolingo, except instead of traditional languages, it's coding languages. And I think it's pretty cool to teach you the very basic concepts. You start off with understanding different logic statements, what arrays are like, how to kind of interact with code on a very basic level. And I mean, would I be able to build an app through it just yet? No, probably not. But it's cool because for someone who enjoys structure and logic and maths, understanding how that framework works in programming, it makes it click a lot for me. So when you look at them, you're like, okay, I kind of get what's happening there. So I'd say I've seen a lot of benefit from that myself, and I'm sure there's somebody in the crowd that has a couple of words they can say about how they've learned something.
Like I say, they're all keeping their cards close to their chest ahead of a hack later on. They're obviously all in the achiever and killer category, and they want to be super competitive when it comes to their solution. But like as ever, anyone kind of watching this back as well, feel free to get involved on Discord. I think it'd be great to carry on these conversations a bit more anyway, throughout the weekend, and see, when you've kind of got into the nitty gritty and you want breakouts, like answer these questions, and we'll have like idea brainstorms, and you can run ideas past us and the mentors and things later on. So yeah, it'd be interesting to hear if you are keeping your cards close to your chest. And
then also stay tuned for our session at 6. That's where we'll kind of run through the nitty gritty of the hack itself and kick everything off. But if there's nothing else from the community, then au revoir. See you at 6, and happy hacking.
Thank you very much, everyone. See you at 6.